Up next, an exotic dancer vanishes.
It was driving me crazy that she didn't come home.
Was a jealous boyfriend involved?
He was kind of vague.
Or was she simply a runaway?
She could have met someone who had money, someone who would improve her life.
But a police cadaver dog and a burned key point to a violent confrontation.
I watched Forensic Files, CSI. I just feel like there's no hope. There's no hope.
Attention all strippers. Here's a song you can work it out to.
Instead of finishing high school, Shemaiah Smith dropped out and worked as a dancer at the Cahoots Gentlemen's Club in East Hartford, Connecticut.
I didn't approve of it. I've always talked to her about getting a job. It's a lot safer.
One night, Shemaiah didn't return home after work. Concerned, her family called police.
She's a very respected young lady, and all we want is her to come home safe and sound.
In a search for answers, police questioned Shemaiah's boyfriend.
The boyfriend reportedly had some drug involvement. He was living with Shemaiah Smith at her parents' home when she went missing, and he had seen her the day she went missing.
He told police she left for work around 3 p.m., but said he didn't know who had given her a ride.
The boyfriend's story that your girlfriend is leaving and meeting a stranger, this would lead most people to conclude that maybe the story wasn't true.
Shemaiah's family gave police a potential clue. Someone had left a message on Shemaiah's cell phone at 11:55 a.m. before Shemaiah left for work.
First saved message. Hey, Maya, Kenny is back in town. Give me a call. Let me know if you want to get together. Okay. Bye.
The significance of this message was enormous. It gave the police and investigators another avenue to go down.
No one knew who this person was. I didn't know. I just knew something wasn't right.
The number was traced to a wealthy local businessman, 56-year-old Kenneth Otto.
We found out that Mr. Otto was an upstanding person. He had a family, a wife and kids.
He was a somewhat successful industrial business owner, had no prior criminal record, and liked to hang around strip clubs.
Ken Otto was a regular at the Cahoots Club where Shemaiah worked. And he admitted he had given Shemaiah a ride to work that afternoon.
He said that he called Shemaiah, and when he called her, she requested that he bring her to work because she didn't have any transportation. So he agreed to bring her to work.
He said that he last saw her going through the front doors of the Cahoots and that he drove off.
But police found another customer who insisted he had given Shemaiah a ride to Cahoots that afternoon. His name was Harold Brown, another regular customer. He claimed he not only dropped Shemaiah off at the club, he stayed and went inside for a few hours. He also claimed he drove Shemaiah home later that night, but according to her family, she never made it inside. So police now had two men, both insisting they were the last ones to see Shemaiah alive. And Shemaiah's boyfriend was still a suspect. But where was Shemaiah? 2 customers of the Cahoots Gentlemen's Club both claimed they drove Shemaiah Smith to work on the day she disappeared. One of those men, Ken Otto, took a particular interest in Shemaiah.
Other dancers at the Cahoots said that Kenneth Otto would spend more time with Shemaiah. He would give her extra attention, sit next to her, buy her drinks, talk with her.
Ken Otto also admitted he'd given Shemaiah $500 to continue her education.
And I told her, nobody's gonna give you $500 just for nothing. You had to do something, and I was like, just promise me you won't never go along with anybody again like that, because people, you can't trust everybody.
In Ken Otto's version, he claimed Shemaiah walked into the club on the day he gave her a ride. But the club's security tapes disputed that.
We viewed the videos, surveillance tapes from Cahoots, and found that she never entered the establishment on the day that she went missing.
In Harold Brown's version, he not only claimed that Shemaiah went into the club after he dropped her off, he also said he went in too and stayed for several hours. Again, the security tapes didn't show Shemaiah or Harold Brown in the club that day. But the security tapes from the day before explained Brown's confusion.
It was determined that he brought her home the day prior to her going missing.
Brown had simply gotten his dates confused.
It was apparent that he was being truthful.
There was no motive that we could establish why he would commit a crime.
So police focused their attention on Ken Otto, since he'd left a message on Shemaiah's phone several hours before he admitted picking her up. On a hunch, Shemaiah's sister decided to try subterfuge. She called Ken Otto and left a message on his voicemail.
I caused him to pretend to be Shemaiah. I was like, hey, Kenny, it's Maya. Just wanted to know if you want to hook up. Just call me when you get this message.
And she never received a phone call back. And that was very telling. Because now you ask yourself, why wouldn't he call her back then and ask how she's doing?
When police asked Ken Otto directly if he'd ever had a sexual relationship with Shemaiah, he said that wasn't possible.
He told us that he was unable to perform sexually due to some surgery, a condition that he had.
He has erectile dysfunction. It was not very, I'm trying to think of a word, successful.
Investigators checked Shemaiah's cell phone records and discovered that 5 days before her disappearance, she made 2 cell phone calls that bounced off a tower directly across the street from a 75-acre piece of land owned by Ken Otto.
We thought maybe there's a possibility she might be there being held against her will.
We had officers on the ground, and I directed that they go into the property and confirm that there was no one there in need of assistance.
Police asked Ken Otto if they could search the property.
He agreed to consent search of his property on Easter Sunday.
When police arrived, they noticed construction equipment, a trailer, some vehicles, and a fire pit.
There was some heavy burning in the fire pit. There was a smell of fuel.
But something else bothered investigators. Apparently, Otto didn't mind the police looking around, but the cadaver dogs were another story.
He became very upset when the dogs arrived. It appeared to me that he was worried we were going to find something.
There was a wood chipper on the property. There's history of cases in the past where people have used wood chippers to dispose of human bodies.
At this point, convinced he'd cooperated as much as he needed to, Otto asked the police to leave.
You know what? I need you to wrap this up. I didn't know you were coming down here with all these guys and dogs and stuff, so wrap this up.
All right.
Now.
All right. When someone grants a consent to search their property, they're entitled to revoke that.
But by this time, the cadaver dogs had already picked up a scent in the fire pit.
One of the dogs found a chunk of flesh that it appeared to be animal flesh.
Once again, Ken Otto had an explanation.
You might find a beaver there.
Excuse me?
A beaver. I shot one a while back and burned it in the pit.
Okay.
There was no obvious evidence of a beaver being in the fire pit. Ken Otto explained that he liked to kill animals and chop them up and spread them in the sand.
It was disappointing that Mr. Otto revoked his consent, but we knew we would be back.
Two weeks after Shemaiah Smith's disappearance, investigators no longer considered her boyfriend a suspect.
The boyfriend saw Shemaiah leave the house and walk out, and that was the last time that he saw her. I believe that the boyfriend was telling the truth.
Investigators were more interested in Shemaiah's relationship with Ken Otto, a customer at the Cahoots Gentlemen's Club, and a piece of land he owned in rural Connecticut.
It's about 75 acres large. It's landlocked. That means it's surrounded by other forest. There's one road, which is a dirt road, access to it.
By his own admission, Otto was the last known person to see Shemaiah alive when he picked her up at her home on the day she disappeared. Otto allowed police to conduct an initial search of his property, but asked them to leave when he realized they brought cadaver dogs. In order to perform a more detailed search, detectives needed both a warrant and lots of heavy equipment and manpower.
There were 2 jurisdictions involved in this. There was a substantial rainstorm that came during that week that hampered the efforts, and they all came together, causing an 8-day delay.
Not only could the rainstorm have washed away any evidence, but 8 days gave Otto plenty of time to clean up a possible crime scene.
All of our fears are realized when the police go on the property. Ken Otto is in a full-size tractor attempting to bury the frame of his 30-foot trailer that was demolished and burned.
Mr. Otto's property looked like man-made hell. A person that was in the process of destroying everything, trees, digging holes, destroying the dirt road that goes into the property.
But the one thing Otto hadn't yet destroyed was the fire pit.
I was very happy to see that the fire pit hadn't been disrupted all that much.
Almost immediately, detectives got a break. In the embers, they found a house key.
I took the key, cleaned it up, placed it in the door lock of Shemaiah Smith's home, and it unlocked and opened the house. So it was Shemaiah Smith's house key.
But this didn't prove Otto killed her. In the fire pit, police also found a spent bullet and 3 shell casings from a .40 caliber handgun. On the ground, near the burned-out trailer, investigators found a mop, a vacuum cleaner, and a large piece of carpet. Serologists looked for blood, even though it had been sitting in the rain and mud for days.
It's definitely a forensic science nightmare, especially when you're dealing with Mother Nature tampering with the evidence and really just presenting extra challenges.
The carpet was marked with a grid of 4-inch squares, which were then swabbed with phenolphthalein and hydrogen peroxide, a chemical combination which turns pink when it comes in contact with blood.
I started getting areas that were positive with my screening test. And so that got me a little excited, and I was ready to forge ahead on this thing.
Each area that tested positive was marked with a piece of tape. Slowly, an unmistakable pattern began to emerge.
It ended up being an area that was 4 feet by 1 foot in size.
To everyone who saw it, it was a body. It appeared to be a human body.
The outline was in human blood. But when it was tested for DNA, investigators got a setback.
No DNA was present. It was just too much bacterial contamination.
Investigators were beginning to wonder if they would ever solve this case.
I'm looking for the worst, but hoping for the best. And the worst is she's not coming home. So I tried to prepare myself for whichever comes my way, but when you in a situation like this, you really can't prepare yourself.
In the search for Shemaiah Smith, investigators collected dozens of what appeared to be bone chips from the fire pit on Ken Otto's property and sent them to the forensics lab.
This skeleton was burned so significantly that it was nearly destroyed as if it would have been in a commercial cremation. The fragmentation was so severe that you had pieces that were the size of a fingernail. It really is like a needle in a haystack. It's an anthropologist's nightmare.
After close examination, forensic anthropologists concluded the majority of the bones were human. But that didn't mean police were any closer to knowing if the bone chips were Shemaiah's.
There was a lot of thermal destruction. This would suggest a tremendous fire that lasted for as much as days.
I had never worked with samples that had been so charred and so burnt before. So I was very hesitant as to whether I would be able to generate a DNA profile from these remains.
But in a case with so few lucky breaks, the forensic anthropologists finally got one. They found a piece of a foot with soft tissue.
There was still organic material. There was still definitely the potential of getting DNA out of that foot.
Well, the other big challenge was that we didn't have a known sample from Shemaiah Smith. So what we had to do in that case was take those DNA profiles we generated from the tissue and burnt skin and bone, and then make a comparison to Shemaiah Smith's biological mother and biological father.
DNA tests revealed that the bone and tissue found in Ken Otto's fire pit was from Shemaiah Smith.
We have enough evidence to establish that the reason he destroyed all that evidence is because he violently caused her death.
2 months after Shemaiah's murder, Ken Otto was arrested at a local airport. He was carrying a briefcase containing $10,000.
He had toiletries, his passport, and various other items.
And he also had a small bag with some condoms in it and some Cialis, which is basically Viagra, generic Viagra.
I have no doubt that he would have bought a ticket and flown to parts unknown.
Taking Mr. Otto into custody was a pretty proud moment in my life.
By his own admission, Ken Otto picked Shemaya up for work. But the evidence shows that instead of taking her to the Cahoots Gentlemen's Club, he drove 30 miles to his property on the outskirts of town. No one knows what happened after that.
Just sit down for a second. I have to go to work. Sit down. Just...
But prosecutors believe that at some point, Otto shot and killed Shemaya inside the trailer with a .40 caliber handgun. Then he rolled her body in a piece of carpet, creating the blood stains later found by forensic analysis. Then he burned Shemaya's body. For days in the fire pit. When cadaver dogs picked up the scent in the fire pit, Otto asked police to leave, and he had 8 days to carry out the most extensive cover-up investigators had ever seen. But he couldn't destroy everything. Investigators found shell casings, a spent bullet, Shemaya's house key, hundreds of bone fragments, and even part of her foot, which all told the gruesome tale of a needless murder.
I think she was very naive about everyone she knew. Like, she just put her trust in everyone, and you cannot do that.
Ken Otto was tried and convicted of Shemaya's murder and tampering with evidence.
At the end of the day, he's a cold-blooded killer. For that reason, Mr. Otto, you can stand up. On the count of murder, I sentence you to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 60 years.
I was ecstatic when I heard the jury decision that he was guilty for murder. It was a great feeling to, not only to bring the case to an end, but also, again, for the family, to have a good outcome for the family was very important to me.
The whole thing was really frustrating. I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe this man may get away with it, but I was determined. I was gonna fight to the end. We were all gonna fight to the end, so my sister could rest in peace and she can get the justice she deserved.
For virtually everyone involved, the most difficult aspect of the crime was determining Ken Otto's motive.
Mr. Otto exhibited sadistic behavior with his treatment of animals, and he may have been deciding to carry that kind of behavior up to a higher level and harm a human being. Couldn't understand why he would do what he did.
We all have unanswered questions. We couldn't even have a proper funeral for her because there was nothing to have.
It may look like a pile of burned fragments that are completely unrecognizable, but in the hands of a trained forensic anthropologist, they will find something uniquely human, and they will tie him to that victim.
Mr. Otto thought he was going to outsmart us, and he was pretty sure of it. And he was going to do anything he could to try to outsmart us, but it didn't work.